and welcome back to another episode of The Male Perspective. I am your host, Lana Reid, and today on this day, I have with me Dr. Livingston Alexander. He is the President Emeritus of the University of Pittsburgh of Bradford and the author of the newly released book, Chasing the Silver Lining, which documents his personal life story. And I'm so looking forward to getting to peek into that. But first and foremost, Dr. Alexander, as I always do, I'd like to take a moment to say thank you for making time for me today. Time is truly a gift. Once we give it, we cannot get it back. So I appreciate you making the space for me today. And with that, sir, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much, Lana. It's a pleasure to be with you, and thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Now, your book, Chasing the Silver Lining, as I said, it documents your personal life story. And as I was reading the blurb about it, it starts off, you didn't come from favorable circumstances. It is truly a story of where you start is not where you finish. So I was wondering if I could trouble you to kind of share where you were born and what your upbringing was actually like.
Absolutely. I was born in a small town in Southwest Louisiana, Bridge, Louisiana, which is an area that most people are not familiar with. It's inhabited by African Creoles, people who, of course, were enslaved in that part of the country, brought in their own culture, but their culture mixed in with people who moved in from Nova Scotia.
Okay.
They're known as Cajuns.
Okay.
And essentially formed a completely different culture, completely different language, much of it French, but with some languages I gather from Native Americans thrown in there as well. And we had a Creole so I grew up speaking Creole and didn't learn English until I went to first grade. My family, my parents did not have the opportunity to go to school. My mother had 3 years of school. My father had none. They were both very, very intelligent and smart, but neither had the opportunities that are available to us now. And so I grew up in a very impoverished neighborhood. In a neighborhood that was impoverished, our family was probably the poorest. And when everyone started to get televisions and cars and indoor plumbing, we were the last to get any of that. And so a great deal of my background was spent, my childhood was spent with hardship and disappointment and pain. Father abandoned our family when I was 4. And so I was raised by a single mother along with my 4 other siblings. And essentially grew up around women. My best friend turned out to be my grandmother. My aunts, uncles doted over me. I was the youngest in the family, so got a lot of attention. There was no escaping our environment. We lived in poverty and shame because we, of course, did not want many people to know about our situation. My mother had 2 jobs and struggled and made it as comfortable as she could. But our situation was what it was. It was impoverished, and we were happy in our situation. We didn't know about any other circumstance except the ones we saw in our neighborhood. So in terms of background, that's where I come from.
Okay.
And I still have connections.
Okay. So I'm pretty sure, because you said you still have connections, you still go back there. Your story where you thrived, you survived, you grew out of that, and you excelled. And I'm pretty sure you go back and you see some people who did not do that, did not escape that. So for you personally, I'm wondering, what do you think it was that propelled you out of that environment and said, I want more, there's more for me out in this world than this small town in Louisiana?
Well, I learned a lot from the boy who grew up in that environment.
Mm.
As I reflect on it, I begin to understand what he was going through and how he was able to overcome a lot of the hardships and challenges. I think he learned intuitively that with every hardship, with every challenge, there is always a silver lining, or at least an opportunity to go beyond that hardship. It's like as I got older and began to navigate our country, you know, you drive through a storm, a thunderstorm. It's very dark and very, can hardly see. And if you keep moving along, you reach sunshine.
Mm-hmm.
And it brightens up and you're in a completely different, that's the way my life has been. When you really think about it, with every challenge, with every hardship, with every disappointment, I encountered silver linings. It was either something came from within me to help me overcome, or someone showed up to lend a hand and to give advice, or circumstances changed. And I began to realize that that's really the way of the universe. If we really look for silver linings after each and every failure or hardship or disappointment, they invariably appear. And that's been in my life. And so this is not to say that there wasn't effort and very hard work. I learned about hard work from my parents.
Mm-hmm.
We picked cotton. We did other kinds of labor that enabled our family to manage and to survive. And I don't know whether or not you would like me to get into more detail of mine, but one of the silver linings was a priest in our community who was seeking to identify boys who could go into the priesthood and serve Black parishes, Black community as a priest, as a Catholic priest. And I was selected along with a couple of other friends from our neighborhood. And we went off from Louisiana to upstate New York, through New York City. And that's a story in and of itself. And studied for 9 years before realizing that that was not the path that I wanted to choose for myself. But we were in a seminary for 9 years, and I learned a lot from that experience. And I chronicle some of that in the book as a way to illustrate how values learned and studies that we engaged in enabled us to move forward. And so there were a number of young Black individuals, young Black boys who were selected and who went up there. Most of us would never have had opportunities to excel and to essentially build better lives for ourselves. Mm-hmm. One of our classmates, not classmate, but one of the boys who was recruited from New Orleans actually became mayor of New Orleans eventually, Sidney Bartholomew.
Okay, yes, heard the name, yeah, okay.
And several became lawyers, and some became very, very accomplished military personnel. I chose education, and I became, I went into, after the 9 years and a lot of study and so forth in graduate school, I was recruited to become an assistant professor of psychology at Western Kentucky University. And from there, after getting tenure and promotions and so forth, was able to advance to the different levels of administration and different universities. I moved to several universities after several promotions and so forth, and eventually became president of University of Pittsburgh at Bradford
Awesome.
as I advanced. And and I did that for the last 15 years of my career. And during the last 5 years, I was asked to oversee a second university concurrently with the one that I was also leading. And so I didn't really have a whole lot of time to write the book that I'd always wanted to write, because I thought that I had a very compelling story that needed to be shared with others in situations like where I came from. And fortunately, I was able to do that.
Awesome.
Some of it before retirement, most of it after.
After retirement. Now, listening to you, you have achieved such greatness with your career. And I'm wondering, has it been an easy journey for you, especially as a Black man? Has that journey been difficult?
Absolutely difficult. The hardships and disappointments didn't end with my leaving Louisiana and leaving the impoverishment that I experienced. And that's part of the story that I try to tell in the book, is that it seems when you look at the highlights, when you look at a bio, for example, you feature the highlights, you really don't deal with the failures and the disappointments that with each promotion, with each advancement and so forth. So I try to be as honest as I could be in the book by detailing the disappointments and the failures. And when you apply for a position, for example, when I applied for a vice presidency after moving from professor to dean and so forth, you're competing nationally with the people, who, many of them perhaps more accomplished, more experienced, and in many of those instances, you're not selected. You know, you have to deal with the disappointment of not being selected, and you begin to wonder, well, is there something wrong with me? What am I doing wrong? And in some cases, you know, you have to apply 3, 4, 5, 6 times before you actually get the position that you're striving to secure. And so I chronicle, for those who are in the pipeline, especially African Americans, and there are a few administrators at the level of presidency, vice presidency, who are African Americans at majority institutions, majority white institutions. And so I try to include as much as I can about the struggle to secure those higher level positions, and how to make adjustments when you don't succeed in a search, and how to ensure that there's no getting away from, you're going to, for 24 hours or more, you're going to experience disappointment and heartbreak, but you've got to go beyond that. And as I use the term silver lining a lot, as you get through that disappointment, you've got to look for the silver lining. And invariably, in my case, there have been silver linings that have come forward, that have appeared, and that have made it possible for me to have the courage to move forward. And so, no, it's not, it's very, very difficult. But having the experience of poverty in my background, and not only that, also seeing what Jim Crow did to my parents and my family and many others in our neighborhoods who I know could have done so well if they had not experienced the Jim Crow, did not have the Jim Crow experience. Those were powerful motivations for me to prove wrong those who doubted that African Americans couldn't succeed and couldn't be as successful as people in other races. And so that's been a driving motivation for me. I also felt what also was motivating me was that I grew up during the Jim Crow era and during the civil rights movement. I was not really able, too young, I suppose, and too, I was cloistered in the seminary, wasn't really able to participate actively in the civil rights movement.
Mhm.
I'm a beneficiary of what Dr. King did,
Mhm.
X did, what Medgar Evers did, and so many, many others. And I felt that I could not let them down. And failure simply was not part of my plan going forward, because they died and made sacrifices for me, and I felt that I had to live up to what they were fought for their entire lives.
So true. So true. Now, you mentioned that you grew up in the Jim Crow era, and listening to you tell about how difficult the challenges that you had rising in your own career. I'm wondering, now that we are now here in 2022, because some people like to say racism is not an issue anymore. Is it still difficult in 2022 to go to the next level in your field for an African American?
Oh, it's very difficult. It's very difficult. I'm not actively engaged in the field right now, but I know for a fact that most of the boards, and I talk about this in my book, the boards at majority white institutions are made up of wealthy, for the most part, wealthy white men,
Okay.
and some women, and they invariably are much more attracted to people who look like them
Gotcha.
and to people who share their social and cultural backgrounds.
Gotcha.
And so it's very tough for African Americans. It's been very tough to even if when you interview on a campus, you meet with faculty, you meet with staff, you meet with students. And even if they all love you and think that you're the person for the job, the ones who make the decisions are the board members.
Mm.
And invariably, too often, they will pick someone who more often looks like them rather than fits the needs of the institution.
Gotcha.
And so I'm not saying it's impossible to get to the opportunities. I'm just saying that it affects the number of those of us who are able to advance to higher level institutions. This is especially the case with Ivy League institutions or first-tier research institutions or larger public universities. But it's not impossible, because I took advantage of African-American presidents at majority white institutions who had been there before me.
Okay.
They, in many cases, served as mentors for me, and I felt the responsibility to serve as mentors for those in the pipeline coming after me. And part of why I wrote the book is also to share lessons that I learned, wisdom that I acquired, that might benefit them as they progress through the various levels of higher education.
Each one teach one. Awesome. Just curious, if you had not gone into the field of education, what would you be doing with yourself?
Well, when I left the seminary, again, after 9 years, and by the way, towards the end, I started participating in demonstrations against the Vietnam War because, well, my brother was in Vietnam.
Okay.
And at the time, Dr. King had begun to take positions.
Yes.
beyond our national borders to the international realm. And one of the targets was the Vietnam War.
Mhm.
And but I didn't go back to Louisiana because I knew what was there. I went to California,
Okay.
lived in Los Angeles for a couple of years,
Okay.
where I sort of searched for where I wanted to go with my life and what I wanted to do. And I thought about law and I thought about medicine. And I remember that I didn't do too well in chemistry. And and I thought about law, but eventually decided that I wanted to go to grad school and possibly teach at the college level. And but I don't know what I would have done other than this, because I love teaching and I love working with young people, helping them develop their minds and helping them to forge pathways, directions for their own futures.
Okay.
And so I'm glad I chose the profession I did, but none of them would have been easy. Certainly nothing has ever been easy for me because I've had to struggle. And even when I went to the seminary, I struggled and studied when everyone else was asleep. And again, I chronicle this as well for any young people who might read the book, to help them understand that no matter what your hardships may be, no matter what your deficiencies may be, it's possible to overcome them with a lot of work. Our ancestors did it. Our people worked very hard in slavery and for centuries after. And there's no reason why we can't. And it's critical. And one of the things I tell young people is that you mentioned about current society and whether or not there are still vestiges of Jim Crow, the attitudes that belie Jim Crow. Yes, and our young people complain about that, but I say you cannot allow it to crush you.
True.
And for many of them, it crushes them and discourages them and forces them to give up their goals. And I try to work very hard, and that's part of the message that I hope to share at the commencement in May next month. And so that's where I am. That's where that's the pathway I chose.
Okay. I was reading, you're talking about commencement. I was reading an article on the internet, I think, where you did a commencement maybe last year or something like that. And it made me think of my own experience of that transition as a college student out into the real world. And college in itself is such a cocoon. What advice do you give to these young people as they're transitioning out, and what do they need to take with them to be the best version of themselves and to be successful? Because it is a big shift.
Yes, I've been leading commencements for the last 15 years of my career. Okay. And before that as vice president. It's been a very difficult time the last 2 years for students in colleges throughout the country. And for the most part, for a good part of their 4 years in college, they spent taking their courses in isolation, online. And what they have lost during that time is the opportunity to interact socially with students who are not like them. And as a result, many of them will leave college with the same attitudes they had about people who are different.
Gotcha.
They were when they came into college. And one of the things that I want to try to address, at least going forward, is what would you have learned had you had the opportunity to interface with students who do not look like you, who do not act like you, who do have a different lifestyle and are different in so many ways. And how do we overcome this, especially as you're about to go into a society that's so polarized?
Mhm.
How do we make sure that you're in a position to choose which side of the division you intend to be? We have a lot of work to do in this country in terms of getting people to know and understand one another, as opposed to base our perceptions of other people on what politicians are telling us about them. And so I've been trying to share messages like that for quite some time with our student populations, at least on my campus. And I will dig into that quite a bit more as I move into the next opportunity to participate in a commencement ceremony.
Awesome. So, sir, these 30 minutes go so fast. I want to ask you, though, before I do my random question, do you think there will be another book coming? Because we're retired now, we have free time. So what will be the next thing?
Yeah, I've had that question. I don't know. I have a lot of ideas. Of course, the one that's immediate is the experience I'm having with my wife, and the whole caretaking experience, caregiving experience is one that I've thought about sharing, at least from my perspective.
Okay.
And there's so much that I've learned, so much that, and I know it's a very, very difficult circumstance for a lot of people around the country, and there'll be even more people going forward who will be in the same situation that I'm in. So I'm thinking about doing some writing on that subject. And, but it's very tough because most of my time is spent caring for Evelyn, my wife. And fortunately, I'm able to have someone come in when I am able to travel and be with my wife, but it's a 24/7 experience.
Yes.
So that's one subject that I'm thinking about.
Yeah, it's a very personal experience that many of us can relate with. A lot of people are going through it. I think I read, and it segued off, but I think I read an article recently that a large percentage of us are spending more of our lifespans over 50 than ever before. So, you know, we're more likely to encounter the caregiving situation such as yours. And it's very time consuming, mentally consuming, emotionally consuming, and it just takes a lot out of you. So, I mean, just kudos to anybody who.
Well, we sing, we dance, we laugh, we joke, and we make the most of the situation we have.
That's
and
so
we
beautiful.
Pray, of course.
That is so beautiful. That is so beautiful. Well, sir, I'm going to ask you my random, just totally random question. And then I'm going to ask you to tell us how we pick up a copy of the book. Let's see what we've got here. Let's see what we've got. What was your favorite class in high school?
It'll shock you what that favorite class was, but my favorite class was Latin.
Oh, well, kind of a spin on the language and the Creole, and I can work with it. I
did very, very well in Latin in translating Julius Caesar, Cicero, Livy, and the Aeneid.
Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him.
Well, there you go.
Okay. Latin. All righty. That's amazing. I wasn't expecting that. I was going to say like maybe English or something like that. That's awesome.
English was a challenge for me, given my background in French
Creole. Awesome. Yeah, I was born in North Carolina, but my dad's side of the family migrated from South Carolina, from the Gullah. So I'm very familiar with um, in a kind of encapsulated language or whatever, because of the Gullahs. They have their own language and own culture that they retained from being transported from Africa to that island. So all my dad's people sound funny to me when I hear them talk, but that's that Gullah. That
Were they from the Fusky Island?
Yes, the lowlands. So yeah.
Mhm.
So, sir, how do we pick up the book? How do we peek in on you when you give your next commencement speech? How do we do that?
Well, the book is available on Amazon.com and Barnes and Nobles. And the commencement is often shown on YouTube.
Okay.
And recorded and remains on YouTube. In fact, many of my past commencements are on YouTube.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome, sir. Well, I've enjoyed my time in learning your life. It's always inspiring, because sometimes I have these conversations with these young folks and they're always, oh, you can't. No, you can. You have to want it first and foremost. You have to really, in your soul and your gut and your spirit, you have to want it, and you have to push for it no matter what. And there are stories like Dr. Livingston Alexander to show them that you.
And it's important for them to remember as well that many people died, give up their lives and sacrifice to enable them to have opportunities that they did not have.
That is so true. That is true. That's why my elders are here with me to remind me all the time. That's right. All righty, dear. Well, I thank you so much. I wish you 3 or 4 more books. I know you have it in you, and much more success. And I thank you for spending this time with me today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lana. I appreciate it.
That is all for this week's episode of The Male Perspective. I'm your host, Lana Reid, and I will see everybody next time.